Good afternoon, everyone. I, Vaishnavi, is here to welcome our next speaker. They say, be the woman who fixes another woman's crown without telling the world it was crooked. So, here we are, having one such wonderful woman with us, Miss Aanya Wig. She is a recent graduate from LSR College, a SUSI scholar, being one of the 4 girls to be nominated to represent India for a Women's Leadership Fellowship with the US Department of State. She's the co founder of a youth led collective working towards creating an ideal world where no woman has to fight to make her voice heard. She's a gender rights advocate, a TEDx speaker, and the founder of a non profit organization working on generating awareness about the stigma on menstruation called Har Hak. We welcome you, ma'am. So, without any further delay, let's begin with this session. Over to you, ma'am.
Hi, I'm also going to share my screen. So if you could give me permission to do that, like if the host can just enable that for me.
All right, ma'am.
Okay, I will quickly introduce myself, but before that, I'm going to apologize. My voice is going to be a little weak today. I got food poisoning yesterday and I'm still recovering from that. Okay, I have sharing rights. Okay, just give me 1 second and just checking if you all can see my screen.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So you already introduced me, but I'm just going to introduce myself quickly again. I'm Aanya Wig. I graduated from LSR in 2021. I did history honors. I run my own nonprofit organization. It's called Har Hak, where we're trying to create an ideal world where no woman has to fight to make her voice heard. I also work at another nonprofit organization. It's called the Udeti Foundation, where we're trying to work on women's economic empowerment. I am a SUSI scholar with the US Department of State, which means I was one of the 4 girls nominated by India to represent us there for the fellowship. I just recently did a PG diploma in international humanitarian law, human rights law, and refugee law. I'm also a TEDx speaker. So I've given 3 TED Talks. And recently I was given the award of top voice in social impact for LinkedIn. So one thing that I'm very proud about is that I'm verified on LinkedIn. So just like you have a blue tick on Instagram, Twitter, I have a blue badge on LinkedIn. Yes, that's a lot about me. You can see some other logos here as well, because these are the things that I've been doing or did at one point of time. I'm also on the Young People's Action Team for UNICEF Yuva, and I used to run a youth-led collective called Girl Uprise, which is now Har Hak, as I talked about. And going forward, I'll tell you more about the story of how Girl Uprise started, how Har Hak came into being. And I also worked as a journalist with the Quint, and I was working for a while at UNESCO. So before we go into coverage and things that have happened, I just want to take a moment to talk about why I'm here today. Of course, it's because your college invited me, but I'm also here to share my journey with all of you. I'm as young as all of you are. So I'm just slightly what I graduated 2 years ago. So we're probably in the similar age bracket. But I'm also here to tell you that if you decide to change something, if you're able to dream about something, and if you're passionate about something, there's nobody that can stop you from doing that something. It could be anything on the earth. It could be starting your own organization. It could literally be getting a 6-figure paycheck. It could be buying a new car. It could literally be deciding, oh, I'm going to lose some amount of kgs, or it could be I'm going to lose sugar. All I'm trying to say, it could be literally on anything under the sun. And if you say that, okay, this is what I'm going to do and I'm going to work on it, the odds may be against you, but you will reach that. Maybe not as soon as you hope, but you will reach there. And so a little context to all the work that I've done and why I started my own organization. What do I do on LinkedIn? How do I, what do I really do? So when I was younger, I realized that the world doesn't look at women the way that I do. I have a single parent, so I was born and brought up by my mother. I also have a sister, so I would see them doing everything. They would run the household, they would go to work, they would be leaders. And for me, women did everything, right? There was no difference between a man or a woman for me. But as I grew up, I realized that the world doesn't look at them the same way that I do. They don't feel the same way about women as I do. And more often than not, they're always treated as second class citizens. And I decided that whatever I'm going to do, whenever I'm going to do it, I'm going to make sure that everybody sees women in the eyes and from the vision that I do. And that's how most of my organization started, because I just wanted people to realize that women aren't made just for the home, or the world isn't just for men. And that's how Girl Up came into being, Agas came into being, Hara came into being. um, so a little more about that is, and a lot of the work that I do stems from my experiences from school or from college or other interactions that I've had with people. So when I was in school, I would very often see people bullying each other, especially girls, when they were on their periods. And what would end up happening is that whenever the topic of periods was introduced, even if you would say periods in class, everybody would end up laughing. Tum kahoge eighth period, and people would feel like, oh my god, what are they talking about? And you would have instances of girls getting their period, and maybe having a stain on their skirts, and instead of people helping them, they would be called out, they would be singled out. And I clearly remember this one incident where um, we had gone for a games period, and some girl probably had a sanitary napkin in her bag, and boys must have found out about it or whatever. So they literally took out the sanitary napkin from her bag and paraded around the class, just like they would have, I don't know, picked up what. And not just the embarrassment that came with it, it just made me question everything. It made me feel so vulnerable, even though I was not that girl. But it also made me realize the way that people look at menstruation and menstruators, especially on their periods, is really not how it should be. And I decided that I'm going to work on ending the stigma around menstruators, not just at a smaller level. I'm going to make sure we work towards it in schools, we work towards it in colleges, and anything that we do, and this was one thing that I decided from the start, will include boys. And this is something that I'll take you through, Age. And I just wanted to say that from the work that we did with Girl Prize, we were covered by Al Jazeera because we did a campaign with refugees on International Women's Day on the 8th of March. And you can see it on your screens here that they talked about the work that we did. We took a workshop with refugee women from Rohingya and Afghanistan. And yeah, they thought it was cool. I thought it was cool. Um, Talking about LinkedIn, I realized that a lot of conversations that we have are very, very uncomfortable and probably not suited for a professional environment. And that's another thing that I wanted to break. It's easier for us to have these conversations amongst friends in colleges or even in our close groups. But as soon as it comes to talking about these things on a professional level or in a professional environment, a lot of us shy away from it. And the reason for that is there are not enough safe spaces for us to talk or communicate the way that we feel. But another reason is that we're too shy of what people might think of us. And that's when I realized that I'm not going to just talk about the work that I do on LinkedIn, but I'm going to talk about other things as well. I'm going to talk about women at workplaces. And if most of you don't know this, the participation of women in the Indian labor force is very less. It's probably one of the lowest across the world. That's not because a lot of women don't work in India. It's just that their work isn't counted. A lot of the work that women do is unpaid work. So, as you must have heard this famous quote saying that there is no woman that's not working, they're just not accounted for it, or they're just not paid for it. So, and I know we keep going off topic because we're talking about LinkedIn, but I feel like it's very important for you to recognize this, that a lot of the people, and especially homemakers or people who do any sort of work at home, they're not accounted for. So any work that your mother, sister, or you yourself do in terms of cleaning, cooking, etc., you're not accounted for in the GDP. But if somebody else does it, say like a domestic worker, they're paid for it. But a lot of them are still not accounted for because all of this falls under informal work. So what ends up happening is that because of social norms and because of social customs, we've been made to believe that there are certain roles that are more uh, predilected towards women and are meant to be for women than they are for men. And you would have seen a lot of women end up choosing jobs or going for career choices that are suitable for women, be it in terms of the career paths that they choose, be it in terms of courses that they choose. And what ends up happening is all of this leads to women falling out of the labor force, which is something that I'm also working on. And most of you are going to join the labor force very soon. Some of you must already be interning, some of you must already be working. I'm sure a lot of you are also planning your masters, but I also know a lot of you are going to be sitting in placements. And what we've realized is that women face a lot of barriers while entering the labor force in terms of hiring, in terms of retention, advancement, or even in terms of re entry. And what we want to do is make sure that these barriers are not just broken, but cease to exist. For the TEDx talks here, there's a little more context. So during the second wave, I started an organization called COVID Fighters India, which had more than 13,000 people across the country rallying for resources. So from 9 a.m. to 12 a.m., we would work on updating our database of the kind of resources that are available across the country. And from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m., we would work as an emergency response team and answer any emergency calls that came across our way. The first talk talks just about that, about how the pandemic was extremely, how do I say, overwhelming for a lot of us. Most of us lost people that might have not been ours to lose. We saw family members, we saw cousins, relatives, friends, professional colleagues losing their lives because of lack of access to resources. And this talk is just a journey of me as a founder, as someone running these organizations, and the kind of experiences that I had from, and this is a trigger warning for a lot of people who might have gone through something like this or lost someone during the pandemic. We would be on calls with so many people, and we've seen people lose their lives, or we've seen the oxygen tanking of so many people on those calls. And what we wanted to do is just shoulder some pain, just do something, come in some way. And that's how COVID Fighters India started. The other two talks also talk about the work that I've been doing in terms of ending the stigma around menstruation, or in general, ending the stigma around what an ideal woman is. And a lot of things that I've told you make uh, are contributing factors towards how we look at an ideal woman. So when I was growing up, I realized that we've come a long way, right? We have these digital TVs now, and we have these auto run Teslas, etc. But the way that we look at women is still very similar to how we used to look at them. Be it in terms of the kinds of clothes that they should wear, or the kind of work that they should do, or the things that they can say, the kind of personalities that they can have. If you see a woman who's too loud, she's probably not she's probably not understanding. And if you see someone who's emotional and shows you her emotional side, she's probably too emotional. So what we understand is that there is just no perfect woman, but our ideals or our understanding or our hopes of what an ideal woman should be is now someone who's not just working, but is also a great mother, a great sister, a great daughter. But these same things don't generally apply to men. If they do certain things, they're great. But for us, it's so much more pressure and so many other things that we're supposed to do. And this is, again, I was covered by UNICEF and United Nations. This is Antonio Guterres. Our work was covered at an international level for the power of young Indians in the fight of COVID-19. And this is a snippet from the video that I was a part of. The work that we did was also covered by many media platforms. You can see two screenshots here, but we had a lot of other platforms cover our work as well. And here, I'm going to quickly take you through the story of Girl Up Rise, something that I started when I was in LSR. And the reason I started was when I entered LSR, I realized I had access to a platform that most women in our country didn't. I had access to resources that most women didn't. And I wanted to make sure that I make use of the things that I have and expand it to people who may not ever get a chance to interact with these resources, interact with those people, or literally get a platform to raise their voice. So we decided to advocate, we decided to lead, and we decided to create impact. This is something that talks about what we were trying to do. We were trying to take up a lot of projects, but the two things that we were focused on as Girl Uprise was, of course, menstrual hygiene, but also working with refugees. On the right side, you can see a lot of our volunteers are now placed across these industries or were at these places when they started working with us. You can see Oxford, HUL, Quint, etc. And here you can see the kind of work we did. One project that I was deeply passionate about as Girl Uprise was the project we had with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. During the pandemic, refugees were one of the worst hit communities, and we decided that we want to uplift them in some way. We started interacting with UNHCR to realize a lot of the families that were working who were refugees in India lost out their jobs, and now women became the only source of earning income. So, along with UNHCR and FDFI, we started a project where we would provide skilling workshops to these refugee women, and they would create masks. And the masks that were created by them would be sold in the markets, would be sold on Amazon, would be sold for weddings for a lot of different reasons, and for different platforms. And we decided, and a big problem that UNHCR was facing was the kind of outlook people have towards refugees in India, and not just India, in fact, everywhere across the world. So we realized through our campaign, what we are going to do and what we're going to try our best to do is humanize these people. We started sharing their stories, the kind of struggles they have, the backgrounds they come from to sell these masks. And we were able to sell more than 10,000 masks by these women and support not just them, but their families during the pandemic. And this you can skip. Okay, so that was a little about Girl Uprise. And after Girl Uprise, we realized we want to do something more and we want to create ourselves into a non-profit organization. And that is, of course, Her Haq. You can read about Her Haq more on my LinkedIn, on our Instagram, on our LinkedIn pages. But a little about us. And like I said, we're working towards gender equality and women empowerment. And we are trying to deliver solutions via interventions. And how we do that is through three main pillars: menstrual hygiene management, financial literacy, legal literacy, and hopefully very soon, social entrepreneurship. And you can see how we're solution oriented, beneficiary centric, and positively disruptive. You can see the kind of impact that we have across India. We've been working in 6 states. We've distributed more than 10,000 pads. We've impacted more than 650 people, and we've had more than 20 impact partners. We work on a lot of SDGs, but the main SDGs that we focus on is, of course, gender equality, reduce inequalities, quality education, and good health and well-being. What we try to do is understand what the problem is, understand what intervention can we create, but also while creating these interventions, we try to focus on the stakeholders. We don't want to have an understanding that, oh, we're some saviors, we're some guardian angels, and we're just coming in a community, or we're just intervening however we think best is. What we try to do is figure out what problems the community is facing, understand from them what kind of interventions would suit their needs, and then create the intervention. For menstrual hygiene management, you can here see that we've had a lot of drives. We collected more than 5,000 sanitary napkins. And like I said, we've distributed almost twice of those sanitary napkins now, because this is an older statistic. Any workshop that we have not just has women, but has all genders. We try our best to include boys in the kind of drives that we have to make sure that we include men as allies. And any work that I've been trying to do, or any work that I plan to do, is to ensure that men become a part of this process, and it's not just a fight against them, but a fight for equality in general. And you can here see the components, the problems, our interventions, what we've been trying to do, how we've been trying to create modules, and modules that are also vernacular to make sure that our expansion in our interventions are inclusive and holistic. For financial literacy, we've been working on not just educating women, but young people about the kind of importance of financial literacy, how they can take loans if they want to go outside, how they can do tax planning. And especially most of you young people here, like I said in the beginning, if you're going to start a new job, or if you're going to look for masters, or you're going outside, we made sure there are boot camp that we organize, and hopefully many more that we'll organize. help you understand these concepts, but also apply them. And legal literacy, which I feel like is one of the most important pillars of ours, we're trying to work towards creating modules to not just impart legal literacy, but also inform people the kind of response channels they have once something goes wrong. And what we need to understand, and I don't know if everybody relates to this, most of us come from very privileged backgrounds जहाँ हम किसी lawyer को जानते हैं या we know a law student or we know someone who knows a lawyer, so it's easy for us to know what to do. But a lot of the people who come from marginalized communities don't have access to this knowledge, neither do they have access to these resources. So we are trying to create modules that are easily accessible, easily available on things like cybercrime, on things like consumer protection, or even things like posh and domestic violence, family laws, etc., so that we can empower women to fight for themselves when something goes wrong, and even better if nothing goes wrong. So yes, this is a little about the work that I've been doing, why I started it, what I've been talking about on LinkedIn, how I started my organizations, and happy to take any questions you have. I feel like this was less of a talk, and I'm sure it wasn't a super inspirational talk, but I'm hoping that by listening or looking at the work that we've been doing or the work that I've been doing and talking about the things that make people uncomfortable, some of you will start having these conversations, even if it's with your friends, or the next time that someone cracks a sexist joke or says something that is offensive, you will have it in you to point it out. So yes, that's a little from my side, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Ma'am, I'll read out the questions. Guys, please put in your questions in the chat box.
Also, if there are no questions, I'm happy to answer anything that might be going on in your mind about any of these career paths, because I also take a lot of mentorship sessions and a lot of LinkedIn guidance sessions. So I'm happy to literally answer something as basic as how to make sure that your LinkedIn profile becomes more accessible, how to make sure that your LinkedIn profile is one that makes people, shortlist you for jobs, or even things like, I don't know what to do with my career. Do you have a question? Or do you have a suggestion what I can take up?
We have a question. If we as college students wants to start our own NGO, what should be the first step or how should we plan it out?
Also, I see it's by Ria, and just like to thank Ria publicly, not just for being the person who's helped, your society to have me here, but Ria is also a great volunteer at her hug. She's from your college, of course. For the first step to start an NGO, and this is what I did. I used to volunteer at a lot of other places to realize how organizations really work. So I used to work at Pradit Sandhi. I worked at CRY for a really long time. I worked with Park Shala. And with that, I also wanted to figure out what is it that I really want to do. It's not that menstrual hygiene came very naturally to me, or I always knew this is the area that I want to work in. It was only after working in other areas or reading about things or my personal experiences that maybe realized this is the thing that I want to work towards. So, yes, identifying what you want to do and what your intervention needs to be. Second, working at other places for sure to make sure that you know how organizations work, things like project planning, project implementation. And the third would, of course, be getting yourselves registered or literally having a collective and just start working towards something. I would say don't spend too much time in thinking and ideating. I would say just go for it. Even if it's a one-person organization, I think you should go for it.
And Muskan has a question. How do you measure your social impact and make sure all your good efforts give the best results?
Honestly, first thing is, I feel like best is a very, very subjective statement. And I'll tell you how we measure things. But before that, I would just say that anything we work towards, we might have a goal that we want to achieve, but more often than not, your goal keeps changing with the kind of work that you're doing. And sure, my goal today is to end period poverty in India, but I also know that one person or one organization can't do that. So things like stakeholder management or partnerships play a very, very important role. The other thing about measurement is really subjective to the kind of task you're doing, but I would break it down into things like quality and quantity impact. Quantity impact is easier to measure, right? How many people have you interacted with? How many sessions have you taken? The kind of menstruators you've helped uplift, the number of pads that you've distributed. And this is just one specific example of, say, like MHM. The other thing in terms of quality impact is difficult to measure, but I feel like it's that one thing that creates more impact. Quality impact could be something like, oh, you took a session for 30 people. How many of those actually start taking up or picking up the things that you talked about? So if it's in terms of sanitation, or if it's in terms of breaking myths, or if it's in terms of literally how to use a sanitary napkin and how to dispose them. Very difficult to measure that because you can't go in the community again and ask people these questions. But in terms of qualitative impact, I feel like if you can manage these things, it's one of the most helpful things that you can do. But yes, measuring impact has to be broken down into quality and quantity things. And quality would also mean the kind of conversations that you're pushing, or the kind of output or outlook people have towards the things that you're talking about. So when we do a social media campaign, we don't know how many people are going to care or change the way that they think. But we hope that, okay, if 3,000 people have interacted with this post, some percentage of them are actually going to read up more or stop doing what they've been doing to sort of continue social norms that have been existing for so long.
Hello, I'm a faculty here in Motilal Nehru College. I just have a small query for you. Do you do formal impact assessment of your projects, or are you required legally to do some impact assessment of whatever work is being done by law or something? I just want to know how social sector goes for impact assessment. That is the thing.
Okay, so it depends on the kind of organization you have. If you're an unregistered youth collective, so even if it's a society in a college, or even if it's like a NGO that few students come together, they don't have to legally do any assessment. But if you do get registered, say if you get registered as a society or a trust under Section 8 or otherwise, there is a formal compliance that you have to do in terms of the impact that you've created. And like I said, a lot of that will have to be quantity and qualitative impact. You are also supposed to submit a report to depending on the kind of organization you have. So if it's a CSR initiative, it will depend on the organization that you're working with and who you have to submit the report to. But say, for example, if it's a trust or if it's a society, you will have different people that you have to submit the report to. And especially if you have a board in your organization, if you have trustees, etc., you have to submit an annual report to them. And you're also legally supposed to publish the report, which is accessible to everybody. It has to go on your website, it has to go on your social media. So the kind of beneficiaries you have, or if somebody's giving you money, or even if somebody wants to be a part of your initiative, it's essential for them to know the kind of work that you've been doing. But honestly, if you're an unregistered organization, like you see so many girl ups working today, they don't have to necessarily legally do any sort of reporting. But also, when you are a registered organization, and if you have a bank account, for example, or if you've raised money, you are supposed to submit the report of the kind of funds that you've used, how many funds are remaining. And especially when grant organizations give you grants, you're supposed to send an annual report to them as well, in the terms of how much money you've used, how you've used it, and what kind of report do you have in terms of impact that you've created.
So what I get is, if you're using CSR funds or if you have some sponsors, your website should show your impact assessment report. It is a requirement for you guys, right?
No, so CSR funds technically can only be used by organizations that are registered. अगर आपकी ऑर्गेनाइजेशन, जैसे अगर रिलायंस का CSR यूनिट है and they're giving out funds to, say for example, a Seva Mandir, or say for CRY, for example, Child Rights and You can only get those funds if they are registered. And sure, they're supposed to give a report to Reliance, but they're also generally supposed to publish an annual report on their website to not just talk about the CSR funds, but funds that they have generally, like other grants that they may have or any other money that they have raised. But like I said, if it's an unregistered organization, you don't have to publicly publish a report or tell people about the kind of money that you've used. But as government mandates, and generally it's a suggestion that anybody who's raising any kind of funds should not do it in their personal accounts, should always have a registered organization, because it becomes very difficult for the government to sort of track the funds that you're using and how you're using them.
We have a question, Priyanka. What advice would you give to your younger self or us?
Honestly, I would still think that I'm very young. So I don't know what advice I would give to myself. But as someone who was in college and as someone who was in a very competitive college, I would give an advice to myself to stop having fear of missing out. When I was in college, I would pick up on a lot of societies. I would pick up on a lot of work. I would take internships that maybe I wasn't even that passionate about, because I would constantly see people around me doing great work and I would feel like I'm doing nothing, and I would just sign up for things. And what ended up happening was I got burnt out by the end of it. And like I said, I graduated in 2021, but it's not like I immediately had a job after that, because I was so exhausted of so many things that I had done in college. And I wish I would have literally spent some time having fun. I don't think I was someone who had a lot of fun in college. Sure, I did a couple of things, but in hindsight, I would spend some time doing nothing. And if you can do that, it's really going to help you balance your professional and personal life.
Ma'am, we have another question. What's your constant source of motivation, or what inspires you to keep going?
The fact that we're not equal. There is no one person or one theme that inspires me or motivates me, but the fact that I keep facing these incidents every now and then. And, even in terms of safety and women, I feel like I don't know any woman that has not been harassed in some way or the other. And I really want to make sure that we do something to stop that. Because a lot of this is not just in terms of resources that you have available, but the kind of power dynamics that society or genders have between them. And I remember the first time that I was stalked was when I was in class 8th, and there was a 25-year-old man that stalked me till the door of my house when I was coming back from college. And things repeated in class 10th, when I was 15, when I was 18, when I was 19. And literally every time I walk on the road, I'm mentally prepared that something might go wrong. And I just want to stay in a society, in a place, in a country where I don't have to be constantly uh, I don't want to stay in a place where I'm constantly thinking that there might be something wrong that might happen in terms of my personal safety. And if I can do that, I would feel satisfied in some way. And that's what motivates me. And this is just one aspect of it. Safety and women's safety is just one thing that bothers me so much. The kind of conversations that we have, the kind of way that women are treated in boardrooms, in organizations, the kind of mindsets that we have around what a woman should and should not do. All of this is what I feel motivates me every day.
Ma'am, Brinda has a question. From where did you get the strength or idea to start COVID fighters during the pandemic?
Honestly, the strength came from the fact that I had no strength. I had no power. I was sitting at home. There was nothing that I thought I could do. And I feel all the people that participated in COVID Fighters India felt the same way, because we couldn't do anything. I wasn't a doctor, I wasn't a nurse, I wasn't a health professional, and I couldn't go out on the streets. I knew people who were doing on ground work as well, but I couldn't do that because I had a sister who had asthma. And in general, I didn't want to be the one who brings COVID to our home or contracts it to give it to other people. Sure, I might be young and healthy, but I am surrounded by people who are not so young and healthy. And I just wanted to do something to shoulder the pain of people who are going through so much loss, so much grief, so much pain. And that's literally how COVID Fighters India started, just to make sure that I can shoulder some amount of pain, some amount of responsibility.
Manasvi wants to ask, everybody aspires to be like you, but as a kid, what did you actually wanted to become?
Honestly, I wrote a really long LinkedIn post about this, and I'm not going to lie. Every few years, what I want to be changes. So when I was really young, I wanted to be a police officer because I thought I don't see enough female police officers, especially in the uniform, and I feel like it's a very powerful post. And then I realized, maybe that's not something I want to do. I want to be a journalist. So I worked at the Quint, and then I realized, oh, you know what? I want to do something more. And then I thought I want to be a lawyer. And I never cleared CLAT. I went to LSR because I got a great percentage. And then I kept thinking I want to be a lawyer. I still sometimes do. But then I thought I can do accumulation of all of these things. And anyway, even if I was a lawyer or a journalist or a police officer, I would have worked on women in some way or the other. So now I'm literally just what you can call me an entrepreneur, you can call me somebody who works in the social sector, but I don't have a profile or a identity that's as permanent or as specific as those career paths that I wanted to choose. But I can still tell you, sometimes I see other people and I feel like I want to be them or be like them. So this keeps changing.
Thank you, ma'am. I think we don't have any questions. We have a college tour for you since you couldn't join us physically.
Awesome.
Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful session. We are grateful to you for giving us your precious time and sharing such insightful experiences. I'm sure this talk would have been incredible for everyone and motivated not just us women, but all the men present here. Your words will surely make a difference in everyone's thinking. Thank you, everyone, for being such a lovely audience.
Thank you for having